So that's what we were trying to understand from the beginning, as well as what components of DEI related training promote significant learning. A little bit about the study participants. If you're interested in how the data compare to the broader student population, here's the data on that. All the data is in the paper, but we list a few of the things here. The percentage of female students among our total graduate enrollment in the 3 years of this study range from 43% to 45%. So this is significantly larger percentage of female students than the graduate student body. And to give a sense of campus context, in the 3 years of the study, the percentage of URM in the student population ranged from 17 to 19%. So that means our URM students, like females, were overrepresented in our data, in our campus graduation student body, campus graduate student body. And in recent research by Laura and Emma, another of our colleagues at Rackham, also found that those groups were overrepresented in Rackham programs overall. So it's not unique to the DEI certificate program. In terms of race, inclusive of both US and non-US citizens, 50%, end of 97, self-identified as white, 13% identified as Asian, 11% identified as Hispanic, and 11% identified as Black or African American, 2% identified as multiracial. So, and we had a few, like 13%, that didn't indicate their racial self-identification. So, so that's the data or the study participants in the study. I'm gonna take this back.
Yeah, we're. So I want to talk a little bit about our study design and methodology. So we used what's referred to as a sequential mixed method program evaluation. And we were really guided by Tara Harvey, who's done some writing about transformative intercultural learning. She notes that this kind of assessment is really useful in training programs like ours that are seeking to help learners kind of learn how to work across differences. So programs like ours that are intercultural development focused or DEI focused. And she built upon D. Fink's model of significant learning, which I will talk about in a moment, and really argues that we need to include multiple ways of assessing learning in a program. And the first way that she suggests is using some kind of reliable validated intercultural development tool. And we selected the intercultural development inventory on our campus. We talked with our campus multicultural centers intercultural learning lead, talked about the learning goals of our program. And really, as Debbie mentioned, we were trying to support our students in their development. And this is also, as I'll talk about in a moment, a developmental tool. So it was well aligned with our program. And the second way that we wanted to assess our program is really having the students engage in their reflection on their own learning. And we really see that as a way to both assess learning, but also actively engage students in the learning process. So we ask students to engage in self-reflection after every single activity in the program. So for example, students over the course of their participation attend 10 different training activities. And after each one, they engage in assessing their own learning. And as we talk about in the paper, in the appendix, we have the entire tool that we use. Again, it's guided by D. Fink's framework, and had them sort of self-reflect on each aspect of significant learning after each piece of the program. And then lastly, in 2019, so this was kind of at the tail end of the second year of the program, following this sequential mixed method program evaluation model, our study team conducted a series of 3 focus groups with graduates of the program. So again, as Debbie mentioned, that would be graduate students and postdoctoral fellows, just to talk with them about how they made sense of the results that we were seeing, especially on their reflections of significant learning, just to see how they made sense of those results that we'll share momentarily. So I'm going to unpack sort of each of those pieces of the program evaluation for folks who might be less familiar, for example, with tools like the IDI. So this is a tool that's adapted from Milton Bennett's developmental model of intercultural sensitivity. And again, we selected this tool because we also have a similar assumption that we believe the students can develop the knowledge and skills to work more effectively across cultural commonalities and differences. And it was recommended to us by a program evaluation expert on our campus. And in this tool, intercultural development is evaluated along a continuum. I know it's hard to see with the Zoom bar up there, but this on your screen is the intercultural development continuum, where students kind of move along a continuum from more monocultural mindsets like denial and polarization, where students either miss differences or judge differences, to more intercultural mindsets of acceptance and adaptation, where they can deeply comprehend difference and bridge across difference. And again, this describes their knowledge, their skill sets, and their mindsets towards cultural difference and commonality. And there's more detail on the theory and model in the paper. Something I want to note is that there have been really some important critiques of the use of IDI, especially in US domestic DEI programs like ours, since we started using the tool in our own program. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those critiques and limitations of our study and kind of future work that we might do to contribute to that scholarly conversation. So this is actually more data than in the paper, so bonus extra data for people who showed up today. We had the students take the IDI both right after they applied to the program, so before they had participated in any learning activities, and then at the end, once they've completed all the requirements of the program. So this table shows the pre-post changes for the first 5 years of the program. We will be sending out our post-test data this month for year 6. So we're continuing to gather that data. Overall, we found that students increased in their developmental orientation, which basically means in that intercultural development continuum that I shared earlier, they moved approximately on average around 10 points along the continuum towards more intercultural mindsets. There's a lot of, one thing I dislike about IDI is there's a lot of jargon. So another measure with the tool is something that's called an orientation gap. And what this really means is most of us overestimate, maybe this won't surprise you, but most of us overestimate how interculturally competent we are. We think we're showing up in a way that maybe others receive us differently. And the gap between, where we are and where we think we are is what's referred to by the IDI as the orientation gap. So one of our other goals for the students is to reduce that gap, just to get better at knowing, my own intercultural competence, having better self-assessment. So we also found that over the participation in the program, their orientation gap was reduced. Yeah, I saw a hand. Did you have a question? 2017. Yep. We should have added that. One thing I wanted to flag actually related to precisely this question of what years these map onto. So year 4 and 5, that's 2020 and 2021. And we moved to fully virtual for the first 3 years of the program. All of our training was in person only. And I remember saying to Debbie in the depths of the pandemic, wow, I'm concerned that we aren't going to see these learning gains when students, we all know working across cultural commonalities and differences, that in-person interaction is so valuable. And we're just delighted that students still engaging in the synchronous virtual learning activities still showed those learning gains. And as a result of this, we now with our program offer all of our training, both synchronous virtual, in-person synchronous, and for students who absolutely can't make either of those, because we do think in-person or synchronous, I should say, learning and being able to dialogue with others is so valuable. But to help them move through the program if they have course conflicts, we also have created asynchronous modules too. We also now have enough data to look at differences between those who take 1 year or up to 2 years to finish the program. So because our doctoral students in particular are so busy and have the luxury of, roughly 5 years, we give them up to 2 years to complete the program. But we do find that students who do the program more intensively, so complete it in 1 year, have greater learning gains. The differences which are outlined in the paper are slight, but they are differences. So it's just, maybe it wouldn't surprise folks, if you do an immersion, language training program, your learning gains are slightly higher as opposed to maybe a less immersive program. And we see that with students in terms of their growth in intercultural competence. But when Debbie and I approached our dean with these data and said, maybe we should make the students complete it in 1 year, he pointed out to us, students are still learning. Even with 2 years, we do see statistically significant growth in their learning. And so again, just to create greater access for students who might have very limited time, we still give students up to 2 years to complete the program. So this is DFINC's model of significant learning. So our second method, as I mentioned earlier, of program evaluation was self-reflection. And this is DFINC's model. It expands upon, people might be familiar, lots of folks here in education, with things like Bloom's taxonomy for learning. It expands upon those classic learning taxonomies to account for the kind of transformative learning that we envision for our students in the program. So specifically, kind of the 3 areas on this right-hand side are those more cognitive forms of learning: foundational knowledge, application, integration. It adds human dimension, caring, and learning how to learn. Like human dimension, if we just unpack that a bit, like learning about oneself, learning about others, those were really critical learning goals for us in this program. And so we wanted students to self-assess, not just on, oh yes, I learned about how to write a diversity statement, for example, but I learned about myself and my own commitments to diversity through participating in this program. So we developed several self-assessment questions, and Debbie is going to kind of talk through those, all the results for those with folks. But we had students do a self-rating on a Likert scale of 1 to 5 in terms of their agreement with statements related to each of these 6 forms of learning. Sometimes we had multiple questions to really assess each area in this pie. And in the tables on the next several slides, you'll see the results in terms of average level of agreement with each form of learning. And anything higher than a 3 basically indicates, on average, students agreed to strongly agreed. And in our data set, because again, every single participant in the program did at least 10 training programs, plus they had an intercultural coaching conversation. So we have over 1,000 responses in this data set, because students were asked to engage in this reflection after each training session or learning activity in the program. So these averages represent a large number of student responses. So I'll pass it over to Debbie now, the microphone at least.
Thank you.
Which place is here?
So I'll walk through the results of each of the 6 dimensions of significant learning. In each table, you'll see the average agreement with each form of learning across 3 categories. That is our core requirement trainings, our non-core requirement trainings, and those can be taking place in a much more varied set of spaces. And then finally, the individual IDI coaching.
And this is the foundational.
So yeah, foundational knowledge, is that where we are? Yeah, foundational knowledge was our first one. And as a result of this, we asked, did you gain new knowledge, apply critical or creative thinking skills? And as you see the results here across our core, non-core, and IDI coaching. So this shows that students strongly agreed that they applied their learning to their teaching, research, or their community. And they also applied critical or creative thinking skills. So then we go to application.
I think you just talked through that one, Debbie.
Oh.
Our slide notes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay, wait. So wait, am I on the right one?
Go back. This is slide on foundational knowledge. Which one? It's so hard to see on our.
Yeah, foundational knowledge is.
Oh yeah, you're
this one.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So this is foundational knowledge. So as you see it, we going across, you could see where we are, where the students were. And then learning application, that's the one I just talked through. So once again, we asked them the questions, the specific questions were reflected on how to apply the material to my research or apply critical skills or creative thinking skills. And then integration, we asked, did they integrate the ideas or concepts in a new way or connected the ideas or concepts to their own life? So there was some growth there in terms of strongly agreed and agreed. And then the human dimension um, was of learning is about gaining greater self-awareness, like one's identity, perspective, their privilege, values, as well as greater awareness of others' identities, perspectives, etc. And we found that students on average agreed that they learned in these areas as well. Caring, another dimension of Fink's model that we like particularly is caring or appreciating a topic or changing personal values. And while students on average agreed that they deepened their appreciation of topics, we found that the change in values was the only area where students didn't average agree that their results due to participation in various aspects of the program. So we found that this was interesting and we focused our focus groups learning on that a little bit, and I'll tell you about that. And the final dimension was learning how to learn. So we asked that, and the students agreed that they continued, that they wanted to continue to learn more about the topic after participating in the activities. So the final step in our sequential multi-method evaluation was to conduct focus groups for the students. And the purpose of the focus groups was to answer our second research question about what components of DEI related training that promoted significant learning for you. And the focus groups allowed students to describe in their own words what enabled significant learning. We conducted 3 focus groups with graduates of the program, and you'll read more about all the participants and the conversations and the coding process, et cetera. All of that's in the paper. But we did want to share 2 top themes that emerged about what promoted significant learning in the program. And the first was the participants' feedback around training facilitation, and it pertained to their perceived preparedness of the facilitators. As well as the effectiveness of the facilitators' approaches, their instructional approaches. So in respect to pedagogy and our approaches, a number of participants value their instructors modeled vulnerability. We were talking about this a little bit and how we feel that DEI training is different than other training and the facilitation. And if you didn't model kind of authenticity or vulnerability, then it really showed the students did not like that at all. So they wanted the trainers to share their own experiences with challenging DEI subject matter, because we were asking the students to do that. So they felt like we should do it as well. And they demonstrated real-time tactics to navigate the challenges and questions associated with the topic. And Laura and I we do train the trainers for the people in our program. And we actually spent some time on that and why it was important and that students should do that. Facilitators should do that. The second was many felt that the opportunities for reflection during the sessions and outside of the sessions, either reflection forms, which we have them do after each of our trainings, or through the assignments, like we have them do an informational view and a DEI diversity statement. They felt that those played a vital role in deepening their significant learning in the DEI certificate program. So we were happy that we had those components as well.
And as Debbie mentioned earlier, we asked students, whether their values had changed, and really learned that was the one area where they said, nope, my values didn't really change on average. It was kind of right in the middle of neither agree nor disagree. So we thought it would be helpful to understand where significant learning did not happen in order to help us better understand what is required for significant learning to take place. So we kind of talked with the students in our focus groups about what sense they made of the fact that on average, students didn't report that their values changed as a result of participating in the program. And there were really two prominent themes that emerged from the students related to this question of value change. And the most common theme was that rather than changing people's values, they felt the certificate aided folks in kind of deepening their self-awareness and skills of already existing DEI values. So, and these two themes are slightly interrelated. The second theme was that, again, because students who participated in the program were already committed to DEI, there was a bit of a sort of selection bias in the way students show up to the program. So it's a purely voluntary program. Students who participate opt in to the certificate, and therefore the students kind of said they already align with the program's values. That's why they signed up. So those who chose to participate already value DEI and actually aren't seeking to change that value, but rather to deepen it. So a key takeaway for us is that while this program provides a really valuable space for those who already value DEI to deepen their DEI related knowledge and skills, the program may have a limited impact on changing minds related to DEI. So because students self-selected into the program, few participants change their personal values while participating in the learning activities. And we're going to share a little bit more about our reflections on that when we talk about limitations in a moment, because we do see that as a limitation of a program like ours.
So some of the takeaways that came from our study is that staff educators can contribute to DEI student socialization. That was a big takeaway because we had some kind of resistance from our faculty, and our staff even had questions about it. So we found the second takeaway is that graduate faculty and staff can partner to create inclusive and equitable learning environments. And this was important because some of our faculty, the resistance came from them not feeling like they had the expertise to do this. So they have their content expertise, right? They know that, but in terms of like, how am I teaching them about DEI? So when we as a graduate school said, hey, well, let's partner together because we can do that. And we will bring expertise. And so when we finally got that partnership, it was really helpful. And also that leaders should be responsive to students' express needs for DEI development. They knew, and we also heard from employers, but the students knew because they heard from employers that these are skills that they needed to develop that they did not have. That is how to have dialogue and communication with people who are, not part of your identity. We're working in a more global world, right? And so one of the things they wanted to learn was that they wanted to learn how to have difficult conversations. They wanted to learn how to interrupt harm when they saw that it happened. They wanted to learn so many different things that, they really came to us like after we said, here are actual professional development skills. And then they wanted to learn how to do those. There are skills and they can be learned. And so as a graduate school, as staff, we were able to do that.
I think I'm talking about limitations. So as I mentioned just a minute ago, the program is voluntary. And because the students self-selected into the program, few changed their personal values for participating. So arguably the program creates a brave space for students who are really committed to developing their skills to work across difference, to do just that. We can't conclude that similar significant learning would happen in a mandatory as opposed to voluntary training program for folks who maybe aren't intrinsically motivated to learn. So that's something that would really need further study. So we aren't recommending to folks based on this, like do this as a mandatory training, because we just don't know if these findings are generalizable to more mandatory DEI development programming. We also understand, and we talked with Dr. Urungu about this morning, that we are a very large, well-resourced campus with a large graduate school with several potential partner units, and that the kind of practitioner session this afternoon. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. We can answer questions about it too, but we partner with our teaching center, we partner with our service learning center, we partner with our multicultural center, and this is only possible through those partnerships on what's a quite large campus. And we know that graduate colleges or smaller institutions with fewer resources may not be able to sustain this kind of resource intensive campus-wide DEI training program. That said, we do think less well-resourced institutions could distill some of the learning from the certificate program. For example, cohort-based DEI training with reflection embedded in the curriculum to support graduate students in their DEI socialization on their campuses. And we can talk more about that if people are thinking about how does this apply to your campus. We also, all of the evaluation measures that Debbie and I talked about are about the impact on the individual participants in the program. So something we don't know is whether students use that new knowledge and skills to really impact the climate in their home programs. So we haven't kind of matched this up with, for example, campus climate data and seeing if maybe do we have a critical mass of graduate students who participated in this? What does that mean about the climate in their home department? That would require a different approach to assess whether students reported they applied their, knowledge and skills. But we don't know the impact on the programs or on our campus. And that is very interesting to us. So it could be a future direction for us. And then this last bit is about the intercultural development inventory and some of the critiques. So as I mentioned earlier, there's been a scholarly debate about the use of the IDI, particularly for domestic DEI programs. Specifically, critics have noted that the IDI doesn't talk about systems of oppression. And so therefore, it may not be an ideal tool, particularly for students of color in the US who are engaged in developmental work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we actually agree with that assessment. We have anti-racism training as part of our core requirements, and we really see the training that we do with the students as a critical component to raising knowledge and awareness around systems of oppression. And we do think kind of absent that kind of training, the use of the IDI could potentially be problematic just as a like, oh, we're just assessing students as they come in and just, making judgments about their intercultural competence without giving them that systemic knowledge and skills for managing systems. So one thing that could be interesting as a future direction is to do a multivariate analysis of our IDI data that controls for demographic variables like race and gender and citizenship and so on. We weren't able to do that because we did not get student approval or IRB approval to do that for this paper, and it came up when we engaged in the peer review process. So that's something we're really interested in doing as a future direction for our work, just subject to student consent. We'd be really interested in looking at that because we think it's an important question, particularly for our most vulnerable students, whether this is the best tool to assess their learning when it comes to domestic equity and inclusion development programs. So that's kind of the final limitation that I wanted to flag for folks. And I think with that was kind of our research findings, and we're happy to answer questions either from the Zoom or folks in the room. We do have our practitioner roundtable later today, but I know, for example, Dr. Irungu said she couldn't make it. So if you have more nuts and bolts questions, we're happy to answer those too. If you're like, I'm not interested in the data, Debbie and Laura, but can you tell me more about the nuts and bolts of the program? We can talk about that too.
So yeah, we're hoping that it would be like interactive. If you had any questions, what's specific about Utah State that might be different? How can we answer those questions for you? And like I said, she also said at this afternoon, we'll be doing a case study. So you'll learn more about the specifics of the DI certificate, but we have time to do that and we can do that here as well. So questions?
Do you mind stopping and share? Folks on
Sure.
the board to see your faces.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we'll give them a chance to see you.
Do they see us now? Let's see.
Let's see. What does it look like? Right now,
I
it
see.
shows my account.
I wonder if it's using the wrong video input. Do you know, Amber?
Over to the other camera, let's see.
Let's see. Go
Let's
down
try
there.
this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
And just see.
That's
Oh,
not
that's
it.
a different.
No,
fuzzy
go.
camera.
It's one more. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
there it is. Yes.
That your target was graduate students. Years.
Yeah.
I wonder though about our power to affect change at present. And to that end, have you thought about how you might target us as faculty members who are interested in creating better climates in our labs, colleges, and across campus?
Yeah, great question. So I'll let you answer as well. We at first had resistance from faculty, but then faculty were like, hey, we want to take the DEI certificate program. So we started a community of practice where we actually worked with faculty, sent them through the IDI and just with faculty because they also didn't want to do the experience with mixed groups. So we were able to do that with them and we met with them. They did the IDI, they took it in advance. We told them about the program and the other things to make those workshops accessible, but I don't think that they came to many of the workshops. But for the community of practice, they did go through the IDI. We did we did a group session of what, broke it down, what it meant. We did individual sessions of it. And then we had conversations, or they had conversations within their units, like STEM versus history versus sociology, et cetera.
Yeah, Debbie, the community of practice, at least at our graduate school, is called our Faculty Allies for Diversity. And one of our associate deans, Rita Chin, she leads that program and really, partly inspired by the kind of work that we're doing with the graduate students. That program used to be very much kind of more like the graduate school gives grants to faculty who are doing DEI work in their home programs. And she kind of said, okay, yes, we're happy to support your initiatives and we would like you to take the IDI and have an individual coaching session. And they had, I think, 4 workshops throughout the year that they asked faculty allies to show up for. And they talked about different, more relevant to faculty topics. So for example, I remember there was one really lovely workshop on hidden curriculum and what are the ways that our curricula are structured with, unspoken norms that might end up excluding some of our students. So they had more kind of conversations or topics that felt relevant to them in terms of wearing their faculty hats. But I will say it just, at least on our campus, and I don't know about here, but faculty are just so much busier and the level of stress is so much higher that the number of hours we're asking for from the students, I think it would be a hard sell. I don't know what unit could do that as a requirement, for sure, but even opt in, like the number of hours our faculty allies spent is probably roughly half of what our graduate students spent. So yeah, but it's a great point. I think it does have to happen at all levels.
Yeah. And the one other thing I'll say is that these faculty opted in, right? I mean, so the students are like, the faculty that need to be here aren't in this community of practice. So we're still trying to, like, both the DEI certificate program, our faculty allies program, they are optional programs for those that want. So we're still trying to work out how we get this knowledge or skills or even awareness to faculty who are just like, no, we don't want to come. And so the colleges are working through that, and a variety of colleges are doing better than others. So they are requiring that faculty take some kind of DEI programming around, bias in hiring, around creating an inclusive lab. So we are doing other things that they're requiring, but we felt like we couldn't. I mean, the reason why I think ours is successful is that people actually opted in.
A couple of questions online.
Mhm.
The first question is, was the certificate open to all grad programs? Was it difficult to get students involved who were from less social or humanities oriented grad programs like engineering?
Yeah, good question. So ours is open to all graduate programs, and Rackham Graduate School actually partners with most of our schools and colleges, but not our professional schools and colleges. So like social work and law and business. Although our dean felt it really important that we open it up to all graduate students. So we did. So it's open to all graduate students as well as postdocs who felt like they were, not in the faculty space, not in the student space, and they didn't feel like they really had a space. But your question about STEM, we did not, it was the STEM students who were like, in sociology and in history and all of that, you all talk about this stuff. Like, we don't even know the lingo. Like, what is intersectionality? You know what I mean? So they were the ones that was like, no. And they were the ones that were going to corporations that were like, how have you demonstrated any commitment to diversity? So they're like, I don't know, So it was those students that I felt we were very surprised that they were the ones that really wanted to come, and that in their schools and colleges is where there was nothing, right? In sociology and history and et cetera, our humanities and social sciences, they were talking about DEI, et cetera, where in the STEM schools, there was just nothing. So they didn't have any options in their schools and colleges. So we felt like we did not have a hard time getting STEM students. We got quite a few of them.
I will say, especially physical sciences and engineering, because the question came up around like chemistry and fields like that, at least compared to their numbers in our student body, comparatively, the percentage, I guess, in their division is lower compared to biological and health sciences, social sciences, and humanities. But part of that, it's so hard for us to tease that apart because we see that across all of our graduate school programming. And on our campus, our engineers are, they're a bus ride away. So we have a central campus and a north campus, and our College of Engineering is on North Campus. So it's hard for us to tease out, is it because our engineering students are less interested? I mean, we have a outgoing dean who's super committed to equity in engineering. Is it because they're less interested, or is it because it's just a barrier, that central campus physical barrier to North Campus? But we have been trying to engage them. Debbie and I had, I think it was a 1.5 year long engagement with the associate dean for graduate studies in the College of Engineering to try and think about, like, maybe we have an even pre this certificate, a workshop on like, why should engineers care about diversity type of workshop. And so luckily folks in those fields are really trying to think about how to get their students thinking about the importance of this work. But I will say, especially physical sciences and engineering, they're slightly underrepresented in the program.
One final
I saw a hand over.
Oh, one final thing about that was that they were also the ones that felt like their professors wouldn't let them out of the lab. So I think it went up a little bit when we start offering our programs virtually. So that showed there was, it indicated that there was kind of the interest, but they just couldn't get the time, and it may have been that physical thing or just et cetera.
A lot of programs like this really depend on excellence in facilitators.
I
agree.
Talk a little about how you select facilitators, who they were, and that kind of process.
Yeah.
Very nuts and bolts question, but the whole this kind of program really provides.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. And one of the things that we said, like Laura said earlier, is that University of Michigan just had we have a IGR, which is our intergroup relations, and we had a National Center for Institutional Diversity, and we had a Center for Teaching on Teaching and Learning, right? CRLT, right? So I mean, we had so many people doing facilitation, so we were fortunate in that we went to those that were already doing great facilitation, already had students that were already there, and we had witnessed exactly what they were doing. Some of it was nationally known, et cetera. So so I'll say we kind of were fortunate in that, which is what we say to people, especially smaller schools, that, you know, that's difficult. And then when we were doing train the trainers, we actually spoke to, this is what DEI, this is how it's different. Like you are an excellent facilitator in general, but here are the extra things that are needed. And we actually had a whole workshop on that for people who wanted to do facilitation. We talked about, we witnessed them facilitating before we brought them into our program. So we were very kind of selective in thinking about it. And we had a couple bumps, right? Like, so we had one facilitator. The students, the one thing they will tell you when they're not happy about with someone. And so, you know, we, you know, always did the great thing about that, we went back to our students and said, here's what happened, here's what went wrong, here's what we're going to do to improve, etc. We also went to those people to say, here's, you know, this was a learning opportunity, etc. So it is intensive, right? I mean, it's time consuming as well. Did you want to add?
No, I think that's great, Debbie.
So we have a couple more questions in from online.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I'm gonna call you out of work, but I think the answer to the first question, the second question is shorter than.
Okay. Yep.
So, second question first, was there any community engagement in Pride Festival refugee programs that were part of the program? So things that are outside the campus space.
I know Debbie, so we have our 5 core trainings, which are, you know, aligned with very specific learning objectives, and those are pretty set in stone. But those non-core, what we call non-core trainings, we want students to be able to follow their interests. So if a student, for example, is really passionate about inclusive teaching, our teaching center happens to have a ton of programming related to that, and they can do all of that required training with our approval, in partnership with our teaching center. And Debbie took students, again, this was pre-pandemic, but we had students who were really interested in food sustainability, and we have a campus farm that's really engaged in, you know, thinking about food systems, and Debbie took them to the campus farm to be, you know, engaging with the community around those questions. So we really, especially had a lot of flexibility in that non-core training area to allow students to follow their own interests. It just, what we would ask of them is that we had to know, you know, if they were doing, for example, something related to refugees, it would have to be something with clear learning goals that was facilitated. So for example, just like attending a protest isn't something we would count as a professional development activity, although they're welcome to do that, but you know, it's not something that counts towards the program. So I think we had students doing lots of things in the community, but it had to be something that was, you know, that had learning goals and had learning activities, as opposed to, you know, I went to a museum, you know, and learned some things. That's great. And we encourage them to do that, but it wouldn't count towards a learning requirement.
Yeah. And just real quick addition is that it was important to us that students engaged with the communities respectively.
Yeah.
So we did have, before they can go into the community, a workshop that they needed to attend that was entering, engaging and exiting communities, right? So you don't go with this kind of deficit mindset, et cetera. And our Ginsburg sitter actually does a lot of work on that. So we engage them because we had this idea of taking them all over the community, right? And so and Ginsburg Center actually took on a lot of that work so that we didn't do it as often. We wanted to, but it was just a capacity.
Mhm.
Okay, let me get this other online question, and then certain folks who have more questions.
Sure.
But it's
Yeah.
easy to lose track in the chat.
Yeah.
So question, I found the values change outcome to be very interesting.
Mhm.
We've had some interesting conversations with our DEI committee and department about whether a goal should be to change values. My personal belief is that when it comes to certain topics like DEI, the answer is yes. Some faculty believe that we should be presenting information and not changing values.
Mhm.
Can you speak more to the appropriateness of changing values within the university community?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question and people have very strong opinions on it. And I believe that it's difficult to change values. So I try to change behaviors. So if we have a university value, and I can't tell you whether you're changing your personal value to meet that university value. However, your behaviors, we are going to have you walk in our values and these behaviors. So my goal was like not necessarily to change minds at the beginning, because we really can't do that. But we can change your behaviors to match those values. And so like Laura said, our values question for our group was like, hey, you know, we already had these values. And now that's how we have so much, I think, success in our program. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's such a, I mean, it's a deep question, like in terms of us as educators. And that's why we really like this model, because I do think Debbie and I were really bought into that, like part of higher education is this significant learning. We're just not transmitting content expertise. It is beyond that we're hoping for in our engagement with students. And another interesting theme, we didn't want to like unpack every single theme, but another interesting theme that came up in the focus groups that students talked about is, you know, value change happens really slowly. And so they said, you know, after you're asking us to reflect on this after every single training, like my values, how that changes and the arc of time in which my values change is really long. And I think, I guess for me, when I think about our goal in the program, I mean, I do think we're just being transparent that like we do hope for students to care more, to develop new values, even if it's deeper critical reflection on their values. That's huge. I mean, I've changed, like my values have changed from participating in the program. And I guess being transparent, I would hope for the same, but I do think that's a really important conversation to have among ourselves and to be transparent about our assumptions and what our goals are. And you know, we talk with the students at the beginning of every session, we talk with the students about what our goals are for that session. And if something is about like, hey, it's about getting you to reflect on your commitments to equity and inclusion and what those values mean to you, we're just transparent with them about it. And if a student, you know, really questions that goal of ours, like we're open to dialoguing about it. And I think that is part of education, is, you know, sharing different perspectives. So I think it's a good conversation to have with faculty colleagues and think with each other about, is this our goal? And if so, how do we be authentic and transparent with the students that that's our goal? And in this political moment, it's frankly, it can be contentious to be saying you're asking people to think critically about their values. Oh, yes, go for it, David.
Apologies.
Any other questions here? Looks like we have about.
Not the person with their mic on. There. All right. Now I'll get out of your way again. Sorry about that.
Yeah, did you have questions that we might talk about at the practitioner session that you want to hear about, or?
I don't know, I'm just really interested in the application of it.
Anything specific you wanted to unpack, or?
I don't know, maybe I'll email you guys.
Okay.
Think about it. I have a lot of things, but it just sound really scattered to ask.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yeah, I was going to say we are open to you emailing us, right? We're very passionate about this work. I just want you all to really think through, in this society that we live in is so polarized and getting more and more polarized. These kind of professional development skills are skills, and they can be taught and they can be learned. And I think they're very important and critical. So while you might not see, you know, it's a kind of heavy weight, you might not see it right away, etc. I think particularly learning how to have difficult conversations, how to communicate across difference, those are really important and critical skills. So we encourage you to keep thinking about how it might work in your system, like Utah. Know your audience, meet people where they are, and think about ways to engage this, right? So, and we were open and helpful. We were open to be helpful in whatever way possible. So feel free to email us. We've also engaged with people who have programs, similar programs all over the country. So we're happy to share whatever's helpful for you.
One more question.
Yeah.
Maybe one time for one more. Given critiques around the IDI framework, do you have any thoughts on where you might go next?
Yeah, I think we really would like to look at the data, like do a multivariate analysis of the data, because these are really important critiques, but the at least the initial research about this has been more qualitative research, like interviews with students of color, Indigenous students, but we would really like to look within our own program evaluation data if that bears out in students pre-post, like, do we not see growth or do we see differences in growth across different groups? So I think for us, the next step for us will be really to examine our own data before just throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I guess, for lack of a better. Debbie and I were just talking about this on the plane, that like there aren't many other great externally validated tools. Like I think some of the critiques of the IDI could be critiques of other similar tools. And so since it is something that has been so helpful, even our faculty, as Debbie shared, engage in the IDI and have found it useful. So I think for now, we're making sure to pair any use of the IDI with training around systems of oppression, training around like critical thinking about your own identities. And hopefully, you know, moving forward, we'll be able to get students' consent to look at this question.
And then there are other assessments that we thought about, and they also have critiques. I mean, we're academics, right? We're going to find the critique. We're going to look at the validity, the reliability, et cetera. So then we, you know, instead of playing this game of, you know, just bouncing from one to another, we chose to stick with that one for.
And I just thought of something too. We also, all of our folks who do the IDI coaching sessions with students we've had learning community conversations about those critiques. We read the literature together. And I've been in IDI coaching sessions with students who say like, I really like question this tool. I think it's like highly problematic. I share the research with them and I say like, hey, well, I'm here to talk to you about your equity and inclusion goals. We don't have to talk about the tool if you don't find value in it, and I'm happy to engage around the critiques. So we take a very non-defensive posture about it and even share the critiques with the students. Like we want to be hearing from them about it. So we're trying to use it in a very self-critical way too, even as a program, and being really transparent about the scholarship on it.
Although I think it's important to evaluate. I think that's one of the things that we're doing and that we can do better in terms of DEI in the DEI space, particularly in this time of age. So think about, you know, how do you do pre-test and post-test? What do you want to use, whatever tool, but it definitely think about evaluation and assessment from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Quick, which is that for those who join us in the communication round, it will be at 2:00 in the Sorensen Center, room 209. There are snacks. If that's the tipping point, there are snacks. Very welcome to join us. And please join me in thanking our speakers very much for their.
Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it.
And there are cookies here. Definitely.